It's Wednesday, December 11th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. And it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is Sal Vetri. Sal, what's going on, buddy?
Fantasy playoffs, man. That's what's going on. I sat pretty good going into some Monday night football games on some standings, and I'm dealing with a little bit of a sore throat, a cold. Maybe you can hear that. And there was one team that I really cared about, and I was facing Jamar Chase up by 40 points. I went to bed early. I went to bed at halftime because I just was not feeling good, was feeling a little ill. I woke up bright and early this morning. I try to check where I'm at in the playoffs this week, who I'm facing. I'm not in the playoffs this week. I go back through the game logs, and I see Jamar Chase has his, 10th, 11th career multi-touchdown game and drops 45 points in that league on me. I lose by 5 and broken. Felt way worse in the morning than I did going to bed. I'll say that much.
I was going to say, I applaud your maturity for going to bed early. That's a real adult decision. Like, okay, yeah, fantasy playoffs are on the line. We got Monday Night Football. Sal is out here prioritizing his health. If you're not feeling well, take a few rest days, sleep it off. You'll probably be okay. All right. I appreciate that. That is a mature approach from you, Sal. But then you just wake up to the most crushing news of all time. As soon as you started teeing up the story, I was like, when's he going to get to the fact that he played Jamar Chase? Because I just knew it was coming.
Yeah, and honestly, it was probably best case scenario that I went to bed because there's been multiple times earlier this year where I'll be like, I'm going to go to bed. Okay, let's pull it up, watch ESPN on my phone. We'll watch one more drive. And if I would have seen that last minute touchdown just running a missed tackle and that's how I got out, I probably wouldn't have slept. There's been multiple times this year when I've done that. I'm a sicko, so it's probably best case scenario. But yeah, brutal start to the day, I'll say.
Do you have any success stories you want to share on the pod? Now, I mean, we'll get to the show. We'll do the whole thing. But I mean, do you have any success stories that you want to share with the people, just so we can bring the mood up a little before we go into the analysis?
You know, I'm trying to think of some, but not really. This was like the one league that came down to the final wire. The rest were all decided by Sunday or whatever. There was no stress there. Had Josh Allen in the league, but that didn't even have any fantasy implications. So, just sadness to start the pod.
All right. Well, shoot. On that note, let's get into the Week 15 data dump.
Yes, science.
My calculations are correct. You're going to see some serious.
I mean, yeah, we're going to get into it here. Hopefully, when we come out of this show, Sal, we'll have collected some analysis for the people out there that they can feel better about their fantasy playoff run than maybe you feel right now. That's the goal of this show. Why don't you get us started with your first stat note that people need to know for this week?
Yeah, this first stat is bringing back even more PTSD on this situation. The Bucs backfield with Bucky Irving injured. I lost by 3 in that league. Bucky Irving got injured. So, I mean, let's just move on here. He gets injured. He doesn't come out for the second half. Let's just cancel the pod.
I mean, shoot. Let's just do it tomorrow. I don't know.
We'll persevere. So, Bucky, he doesn't come out for the second half. He gets injured, and the first quarter was already limited. We knew he had some injuries coming into this game. So we look at what happened in the second half of that because it does seem like Bucky is probably going to miss Week 15. We'll have to track the practice reports as always, but this was a re-injury to a back. Might even miss more time. We'll see. Rashad White had 8 carries in the second half to 3 for Sean Tucker. So you look at that, it's like a 73% carry share for Rashad White. But I looked a little bit closer at this. The Bucs only had 4 second half drives. And through the first 3 drives, the split was 5 opportunities for White, 4 for Sean Tucker. Sean Tucker had a 34-yard run, which was by far the best run out of any running back in this game for Tampa. He gets pulled at the 3-yard line. Rashad White comes in, kind of vultures that touchdown. But through those first 3 drives in the second half, it was Tucker for 47 yards on 4 touches, Rashad White for 39 yards on 5 touches. And then the final drive of the game, they're just kind of icing it. 3 carries go to Rashad White for 6 or 7 yards. But I think this is closer than people are probably going to expect moving forward. White's obviously been involved in the offense for the most part this season. I think he will be the lead back heading into Week 15 if Bucky was to miss. But I do think we have to take Sean Tucker seriously, not only because of what he's shown whenever he gets the ball this season, averaging 6-7 yards per touch depending on the game, but also because I think this actual usage in Week 14 was closer than people expect when they look at the final box scores.
No, it's a great call out. I mean, I think that at times when this looked like this was going to devolve into a 3-headed monster in this backfield, that obviously that comes with a lot of complaints and concerns from fantasy managers. But part of me was, I kind of get it just because I think Sean Tucker is a legit back, and I think his performance against the Saints was kind of one of those moments where I thought it was going to be tough to put the genie back in the bottle. But to the Bucs' credit, I think in service of, hey, how good Bucky Irving is, but also just letting these guys, Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, get into more of a rhythm, they kind of cut Sean Tucker out of the rotation. But if it is that Bucky Irving is going to miss this game, maybe a couple more, hopefully not. But Sal, one of the things I've said on the Yahoo airwaves for many, many years is ain't nobody used to have a bad back, right? Once you got a bad back, you got a bad back, and it just can be something that lingers. I didn't love seeing him on the sideline. I'm sure you didn't either with the heating pad. Okay. I mean, NFL players are not like us, let's be clear, but who among us has not also been, laying down on the couch with the heating pad on the back? Okay. That was not a good sign to see. Anyways, point here is, I do think Bucky's probably going to miss this game. I do think we will see a little bit of Sean Tucker. We probably should see a little bit of Sean Tucker because he's a good player. How do you feel about this offense and this run game in particular going against a Chargers team that, at times has been statistically a very, very good run defense?
Yeah, at times they have been. Middle of the season, they dealt with a little bit of injuries, especially on their defensive line, which kind of changed that. To this point, I would say solid, probably above average run defense on the season. So, look, they're going to be 3-point underdogs on the road. This should be, for the most part, a neutral environment. These are two good teams, potentially two playoff teams. So, I'm not too concerned. Even if they were to fall behind on the road, Tampa, in this game, that might even open some things up more for Sean Tucker. Like, we think of Rachaad White as the guy who's been out there in passing down situations for at least the first half of the season. Bucky Irving was starting to take that usage away these last couple of weeks in the 2-minute offense, long down and distance. Sean Tucker, this is a guy who caught 36 balls his final year of college. If you're a running back in college catching 20 balls, that's good. We've seen this year them use him in the 2-minute offense at times when he was kind of forcing that three-headed backfield. In week 12, he fumbled. He got put in the doghouse against the Giants, fumbling on the goal line. We actually saw him finally get back involved this week. I think he could be out there in passing down situations. They were trying to use him around the goal line as well a few weeks back. So, yeah, if they fall behind, I think it's fine for both these running backs. They have the pass catching opportunity, but I think it remains a neutral game script. I'm probably expecting a pretty clear split. Like, if both guys see 12 touches, I'm not surprised by any means.
Yeah, 100%. I think Tucker, you might want to just pick him up, put him on the end of your bench, just in case. White suffers an injury. He definitely is a pretty good stash candidate at this point. Where do you think Rachaad White's going to kind of fall in your final running back rankings if Bucky does miss this game?
Yeah, he'll get into the top 24 for sure if there's no Bucky. I kind of am thinking around, especially after last night, what Rico Dowdle did. Rico Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard range, Brian Robinson off a bye, right around that RB20 or so.
I ask you from a personal standpoint because I do have a lot of Rachaad White teams. So I'm hoping that he gets the start this week for my own selfish purposes. Let's talk another running back here for your second storyline, who's coming off a pretty decent outing last week.
Yeah, Tyron Tracy, all the concerns that we had about him a few weeks back when he was fumbling in back-to-back games. One key fumble probably lost him the game in overtime overseas in week 10. Well, week 13 comes, Thanksgiving Day. What will his role look like? Will Devin Singletary get some more usage? A little bit more usage for Singletary, but still 60% of the opportunities went to Tracy, over 70% of the snaps, and continued to look like the more explosive back. And then this carried over into this past week where he took this backfield right back over. 84% of the snaps was the most he's played in a game with Devin Singletary active this year, and 25 of 27 backfield opportunities, by far his best usage. That's a 93% opportunity share, as elite as it gets. We also got to see him unlocked for really the first time this year in a major way as a receiver. 10 targets, led the team with a 23% target share. A lot of these are checkdowns from Drew Lock, but that might be what we're getting moving forward, given the offensive line of the Giants, given their overall offensive environment, probably going to be trailing in many games. So if there was any concerns in terms of Tyron Tracy's usage, I think those are completely gone now. I think rest of season schedule-wise, he's going to have a tough matchup coming up against Baltimore. That's also a matchup in a team that does allow a lot of catches, 5 per game to running back, so that can be kind of an escape route for him. But I'm thinking about if Tyron Tracy continues this production, continues this usage, continues to look this good for the final month, where are we going to start drafting him next year? Is it the 3rd round, the 4th round of fantasy drafts? Is it that high?
I mean, I think so, man. He fits the archetype of back that you want to invest in. Young guy, looks explosive. He's passed a production test in a garbage Giants offense, and we'll see what happens in the offseason. Obviously, they could bring somebody else in. It might be a new GM. It might be a new coaching staff who's just completely not invested in Tyron Tracy. That's obviously a huge variable here. We have no idea who's going to play quarterback. There's a lot of unknowns, but right now, as we sit here, if he continues to pass this test down the stretch, he's somebody that definitely fits the archetype of back that I want to be invested in for sure. I think 3rd, 4th round is very fair. I really like Tyron Tracy as a a runner. Nervous about him this week with the matchup against the Ravens, obviously, but he's definitely a guy with that pass catching floor who could get by as I would call him more of like a flex play this week.
Yeah, completely agree. And then the final 2 weeks of the season for him, assuming your fantasy championships week 17 are the Falcons and Colts, those are fine matchups, not concerned about those. Honestly, you might see the Giants only 3-point underdogs, maybe even favorites, depending on who's going to be starting for the Falcons that week. So yeah, I think everything looks good here. He's producing as an RB1, pretty close to an RB1, top 15 back in his starts this season when he's actually out there as the guy. Yeah, everything looks great. I mean, this is a player who is extremely explosive, catches passes, has the size, the wide receiver background, everything's shaping up to be that third or fourth round pick next year.
Yeah, man, I just always makes me a little bit nervous with kind of the day 3 backs, especially if there's any change. I mean, he definitely fits better from a pass catching standpoint than like the Dameon Pierce types. But I got very excited about Dameon Pierce in his second season, and that was a new coaching staff that came in, and he just did not fit the system at all there for the Houston Texans, and they basically they didn't play him at all really down the stretch in 2023, and then obviously they brought in Joe Mixon this year, and Pierce has been a pretty straight backup. So I don't know, from a dynasty perspective, it's always interesting with these guys. You can almost always make a profit selling on these players, but there's always exceptions. And at least from the pass catching archetype part, that's what makes me think maybe Tracy could be an exception, but that's at least an interesting stance. Is that, yeah, from a redraft perspective, I think he'll go in that 3rd and 5th round range. From a dynasty perspective, he's somebody that I would maybe see what other people want from him if he continues to finish the season strong.
Yeah, it would be very much the Giants to let Saquon go, not pay a running back, and then after next year sign Kenneth Walker to an outstanding contract and
100%,
just shelf
bro.
Tyron Tracy. Yeah, it would be so much them. But I mean, it's worst case scenario right now for Tyron Tracy. The line is banged up, no Andrew Thomas. The quarterback situation outside of the Raiders, and maybe even compared to the Raiders, is like the worst you can find right now. And he's still producing at these RB1 type levels. So only up from here as long as he avoids a 2nd or 3rd round running back in the draft. And there's a lot of them in this upcoming draft, so we'll have to wait and see.
We're not going to talk about this team, but just because you've got my gears turning on these, like this running back archetype, how do you feel about Chase Brown in this discussion with the Bengals? Because I remember getting questions about him, like, should I sell this kind of wide receiver 2-3-ish in Dynasty for a guy like Chase Brown? Because there's real risk in that, right? You sell somebody that is going to probably just be locked into a role for a very long time. I don't remember who the wide receiver was in this debate that somebody was asking me, and kind of this, but you get my like general vibe of the player I'm talking about. Like somebody you're probably starting, maybe never turns into a top 5 dynasty receiver or anything like that, but somebody that you're starting every single week. For a guy in Chase Brown, who legitimately the range of outcomes is he just becomes such a central figure of this Bengals offense. They don't address the position next year, and he's a running back 1, because this usage he's getting right now, this is running back 1 usage. And if it kept up, he'd be a fantasy RB1 next year. The floor is also same thing that we just talked about. They bring in somebody at the position. He gets kind of Wally pipped by that guy. But because he has the pass catching upside, that's where I kind of get stuck sort of in the middle here. Again, just similar sort of archetype of player here with Chase Brown, obviously playing in a much better ecosystem.
Yeah, I feel pretty confident in Chase Brown. Yeah, it would depend on the receiver. Most scenarios, I'm probably taking the receiver, especially if it's a 1st or 2nd year receiver. I don't know, a Brian Thomas, a Rome Odunze is maybe like that thinking point, but even then, I'm still feeling probably confident in Rome Odunze in situation. But Brown's right there in that scenario in terms of tiers of players. They've already invested over a year into him, into his development. I don't think the coaching staff's going anywhere. I wouldn't think it is, so that should be there. Joe Burrow's not going anywhere. Everything should stay stable. It is just this upcoming RB draft class is probably going to see, like, I would say at least like 6 or 7 running backs go in the 2nd or 3rd round, maybe even more, like maybe even push more, which I'm assuming one's going to land in Cincinnati based on what they currently have there. We'll see. But I think Chase Brown has the leg up on whatever competition that is, assuming he keeps playing how he is right now, the final month of the season.
I don't know if you caught this last night. I only saw people talking about it on Twitter, but apparently Peyton Manning on the Manning cast said that Chase Brown got LASIK in the offseason. And wow. Anecdotally, I would say that his vision seems better as a between the tackles runner. So I don't know. Maybe he's just stock up because he can see now.
Yeah, I did not catch that. I might have been sweet dreaming by that point.
Yeah.
But
you might have been like, just deep into the NyQuil at that point. I don't know what the hell you were doing at that point.
NyQuil was within me. Yeah, that's for sure. So I would say it has to help. It has to help. I don't know how bad the dude's vision was at 21 years old, but it has to help.
Yeah, I mean, shoot. It hadn't helped Jameis, really. He's still Jameis. But okay, let's move on to another backfield here for your third point.
Yeah, the next backfield I want to talk about is just what we saw with the Jets this week. A lot of confusion surrounding Breece Hall earlier in the week. What's his status going to be? Reports that he was dealing with a potential multi-week injury, but he was still, questionable. They weren't ruling him out. Then it comes out that it's an MCL. There's a pretty decent chance this is like a minimum 2-week recovery, especially for a running back. Starts to get the concerns on, do they just shut him down? Like, what are they playing for at this point? Is he really going to come back just for the final week or two of the season? But if a player's healthy, players like to play, in my opinion. I think he does play. But I don't know if he's going to play in week 15. It seems kind of, pretty much up in the air still. So what we saw was we thought we were going to get a lot of Braylon Allen. We did get that, but we also got the other rookie that they drafted this summer, and Isaiah Davis, who over the past 2 years in college football, albeit South Dakota State, a smaller school, he led every single running back these last 2 years with over 3,000 rushing yards, was averaging 1,700 total yards a year. He has the size, the productive background, he can catch passes. So it's kind of all there. It was just, smaller school was kind of the knock on why he went later in the draft, but they trusted him. They gave him 16 opportunities, the same amount as Braylon Allen. He, like Braylon Allen, was efficient in this game. Both guys are averaging around 5 yards per touch. So now we get a little bit of confusion moving forward, assuming Breece Hall is out. I think Isaiah Davis becomes the top waiver ad, assuming Braylon Allen's already off your waiver wire, and guys like Charbonnet aren't there, of course. But you're getting a defense this week where Jacksonville allows the 9th most rushing yards per game. They just gave up over 120 yards to Tony Pollard. I think you can flex both of these guys this week. There's not 6 teams on bye, so you kind of have to be in a little bit of a bind for your roster this week, right? You have everybody available, but Davis definitely shouldn't be on waiver wires. And honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if he continues to see this usage and continues to play this well and push Braylon Allen aside a little. This is a new kind of coaching staff in some regards since Allen's beginning of the year surge. And since then, it's been less and less usage for Allen in these types of situations.
I saw a friend of the show, good buddy JJ Zacharyson, tweeting, I think it was yesterday morning, something like that like he was never going to forgive the Jets for drafting Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis to basically be behind Breece Hall, a guy that is a really good running back, right? One of the better running backs in the league. Obviously, he was a first-round pick in fantasy across the board. He probably hadn't had the best season in the world, but still. Because both these guys you mentioned were really, JJ does great work with data and prospects and things like that. And both these guys, Braylon Allen and Davis, had some real interesting notes in their profile. You highlighted a lot of it with Davis there, the production, smaller program. But, I mean, shoot, he's definitely hit. Feels like Rodgers has been kind of jacked up to throw to him every now and again and really likes him as that receiving outlet option. I'm very much interested in this Isaiah Davis thing because at the beginning of the year, Braylon Allen was mixing in with Breece Hall, and I kind of got it right just because Braylon Allen's a bigger body. He's an aggressive runner. He could maybe bring some more of a power element, some grinder carries to take away from Breece Hall to keep him fresh for the explosiveness and things like that. But Davis has definitely been a guy that I think has earned touches, and if there's no Breece Hall, yeah, I love your call as these are both probably flex players. And I feel like Davis was not discussed enough in sort of once we found out Hall was probably not going to play, I don't think Davis got enough pop, but it has been a minute since we've seen Allen as the clear-cut RB2 behind Breece Hall and not like a real split between these two guys.
Yeah, and look, 32 running back opportunities last week in a game where Aaron Rodgers throws for over 300 yards for the first time in 3 or 4 years. Like, now they face the Jaguars as road favorites. The Jets are favorites this week. I don't think Mac Jones is going to score on the first 4 drives of the game like the Dolphins did last week, force Aaron Rodgers to throw. I think you're going to see another 30-plus opportunities for this backfield. Again, assuming Breece Hall does not play in this one. Probably going to be a clear split. If you're getting 15 touches for a running back in a positive game script, most likely, worst case against Jacksonville, a neutral game script, of course, you have nobody on bye like we mentioned earlier. You don't want to force these guys into your lineups. But I think you're going to be getting a double-digit projection on both of them this week in a nice spot.
That has been one of the games upon rewatch that I find the toughest to calibrate to, like, what the hell happened in this game, just because the Dolphins defense has been pretty good all season, I think. They've rushed the passer really well. They've played a lot of good coverage, but Garrett Wilson was just kind of giving Jalen Ramsey the business on the back end. There are also some blown coverages on the back end as well. And the running backs just got going here. So they have a rematch with this Dolphins team in Week 18 due to the New York Jets. But between that, they have the Jags this week. They have the Rams and the Bills. Obviously, the Jet season's over. It's all about what happens in the future for this team. Another tear down, another regime change. But they have all the incentive in the world, Sal, in 3 pretty good matchups there with Jags, the Rams, and the Bills in terms of a run defense perspective to try to see what they have in these 2 young guys behind Breece Hall.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, Rodgers has shown at times this year that he likes throwing, honestly, to both of these rookies. He feels comfortable with them, which is not usually the case with Aaron Rodgers. So that, I think, puts a feather in both Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen's cap. And when you're facing the Rams and what their offense just looked like this past week, and Josh Allen, what he's looked like all season long in the Bills, you're probably going to be playing from behind in those games at some point, if not the entire time. So having backs who can actually catch passes will help as well.
Talking about a backfield where we have a abundance of intriguing options and like two guys that were drafted in the same range, right? Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. That perfectly transitions us to your fourth team that you want to talk about here, the Seattle Seahawks backfield with two day 2 draft picks that just like why are these guys on the same team? So frustrating. But you want to talk about Zach Charbonnet here.
Yeah, it's hard not to. And I think it was like the first quarter of this game, and I was starting to put some ideas on like maybe some stats to talk about on this show and some things. And I was like, Zach Charbonnet's already looked pretty good. And then he just blows up for the second half. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to talk about Zach Charbonnet. Zach Charbonnet, who I think we talked about last week, is sort of like a make sure this guy's not available on your waivers. He wasn't in many serious leagues, but still out there in a decent amount. Nowhere near the case now after this past week going for 150 plus yards, scoring touchdowns, explosive plays left and right, continuing to do what Zach Charbonnet has done all year when Kenneth Walker has been out, and even dating back to last year for a game or two. But so far this season, in 3 games without Kenneth Walker, Charbonnet, they're trusting him with 23 touches a game the second year back, 123 total yards per game, and 27 fantasy points per game. I mean, this is basically the RB1 in fantasy when Kenneth Walker is off the field. 5 touchdowns in those 3 games. We know he's a pass-catching back. When you date back to UCLA, his final year there, he wanted to make it a real emphasis to catch passes. He went out there and he had a 30-plus reception season. He's had 5 catches per game in his starts without Walker this year. Doing everything you want out of a fantasy running back. Continuing to see heavy workloads, catching passes, scoring touchdowns, creating explosive plays. And I was going to come on here and say, like, okay, well, Kenneth Walker probably comes back in week 15 and, just keep Charbonnet because, he's one of the best stashes and handcuffs as we've seen out to this point. But now the recent reports are like Kenneth Walker is maybe dealing with a new injury or an aggravated calf. So this is a real scenario where you might not get the RB1 40-point games from Charbonnet moving forward, but if Kenneth Walker is out, you have a top 10 running back locked into your lineup right as the fantasy playoffs come. You've been stashing this guy since week 2 and 3 when Walker went out. If you've had him on your roster that whole time, I think it might be about to pay off even more.
I didn't realize these two guys both have 7 touchdowns on the year. Wow. Charbonnet has at least been involved a little bit, and this is why I'm so annoyed that these two guys are on the same team because they're different backs, which I guess they complement each other well, but I just don't feel like either guy is ever going to be in enough of a rhythm to really take over the job and really give you their best play unless the other is not here. The results show that with Charbonnet, who I think more than Kenneth Walker is a little bit more of that, like he can hit you a home run, but he's a little bit more volatile than Charbonnet is. Charbonnet is a perfect rhythm back. Like the more we give him the ball, the more he can give you. Really liked him as a prospect coming out of UCLA. I feel like I've liked a lot of what I've seen of him as a pro. He has definitely been their most efficient runner on gap scheme concepts. 5.8 yards per carry, 53% success rate. One of the better numbers in the league there as a gap scheme runner. And I like that they're kind of leaning into that more. So, man, it just, especially if they can get him runs. I haven't looked at his numbers from the shotgun, but that matters a lot too. When we're talking about Kenneth Walker, I think is a more traditional under center back. Geno is a pure shotgun passer. So we talked about this last week, right, Sal? I've been pretty underwhelmed by the Seahawks run game all year, but when they get one guy here and they can narrow it down to this one dude, and it is Zach Charbonnet right now, I think it becomes a little bit of a different equation in the run game. Matchups are kind of whatever down the stretch. Packers, Vikings, Bears. But Vikings is a tough matchup, but Bears, you can run on them to the perimeter, although that's not really what Charbonnet does. And the Packers, you can definitely run on as well.
Yeah, I think you could definitely run on the Packers. They've been a little bit better this year at stopping the run, but especially in the pass-catching department against their linebackers, you can definitely get out in some space if you're Zach Charbonnet starting this week. And yeah, I mean, we have one more year of Kenneth Walker with Seattle. At least he has his final year coming up next year. It's going to be really intriguing to see what they do at this point if we continue to see these one-off games from Charbonnet producing like a workhorse when he gets the opportunity. So this is a Sunday night game of this upcoming week at home. They're actual 2-point underdogs. Should be a really good game against the Packers. A lot on the line for the playoffs and playoff seeding there. I think if Charbonnet suits up, it's going to be another situation where they probably want to get him the ball close to 20 times, 16-plus times. And I don't think we should overlook the importance of JSN emerging, DK Metcalf seeming healthier each week. When you have one guy on the outside that defenses have to worry about, let alone now 2 guys, that's going to open up even more for your running game no matter who's starting for Seattle.
I like it. I think if there's no Walker this week, I'll probably rank Charbonnet inside my top 15 backs. And I hear you that I think that Walker probably takes his usual role back when he's healthy, but it is a new staff that did not draft either of these guys. And I think it's a staff that's also shown that, hey, when a guy shows us something, we can change our approach and we can change our offense. That's basically what's happened with the JSN stuff. DK Metcalf misses some time, JSN pops off afterwards. Like I think there's I don't know what percentage I'd put it on, but I don't think it's a 0% chance that we emerge from this Kenneth Walker absence with Zach Charbonnet maybe flipping the backfield and he's the one and Walker's the two, but I don't think either guy's going to be completely removed.
Yeah, and I also think it helps Charbonnet fantasy managers that like the Seahawks know what they have in Charbonnet. Like I don't think they might not even look at it as a step down at all if they keep Kenneth Walker out. So they might just play it on the safe side for this upcoming week, which only helps more if you are a manager of Charbonnet.
All right, it's time. Let's get to the fifth, the final, the secret stat. Sal, hit me with it, and I will try to guess it. You got duped last week, so it's maybe my turn to fall victim to this here.
All right, yes. So this is a fantasy running back, and I would call him an elite fantasy running back if we're considering that an RB1 that really nobody's talking about. His strong season continued in week 14, despite a tougher matchup, I would call it. He was able to find success. He had 20-plus touches, had over 100 yards and a score again. So this is now the sixth time this running back has finished as a top 10 back this year, basically 50% of his starts this season. He's topped at least 100 total yards and or scored a touchdown in 9 of his last 11 games. He's one of just 3 running backs to do that over this 3-month stretch or so during those 11 games when you factor in the bye week. So right now he's top 10 in running back usage. He's top 15 in fantasy points per game on the year, but he's about 0.3 points away from being a top 12 back. So I'm just going to cheat and say that he's been an RB1 this year for the purpose of this video and this show. Sure. So this is a guy who upcoming in week 15, I would say the matchup is a nice spot. His team is actually going to be a favorite this week, so it should set up for even more neutral to positive game scripts. There's been a little bit of shakeup in the offense as of late, which I think actually probably helps him moving forward. So this is a running back that I consider an elite running back in fantasy this year, and maybe a surprise to some people. I don't think people view him that way even more, but who is this secret player behind my secret stats, Matt?
Honestly, I have no idea.
I kept this one. There was like 4 points in here where I could have said a certain number or a different name, and I was like, that would narrow this down to 3 guys. So I'm just maybe even 2 guys. So I was like, You know what? I'm going to keep it vague there.
Okay, yeah, it is very vague. Like there's no clear giveaway phrase. Like last week you gave away the Josh Jacobs stuff.
Yeah, I had maybe 2 giveaway phrases that are currently in my notes right here, and I was like, I'm not saying that.
Also, by the way, as soon as you say like nobody's talking about this, you immediately like that is the clearest way to mess with my brain, because I'm like I'm hyper focused on that as opposed to you listen all these great stats and things like that. I'm like who's not being talked about out there that's a running back one. I don't know. Is it? I'll give a guess. Is it Tony Pollard?
No, it's not. The streak is over.
The streak is over for me.
I have 2 hints that I think after both of them will give it away. Okay. Do you want one of the hints?
Yeah. Yes, I do. Desperately.
He didn't have just 20+ touches this past week. He had 30+ touches.
I mean, is it Kyron Williams?
Nope. Also a good guess. And his offense got shaken up a little bit because his main competition in the backfield is now on IR for the rest of the season with the knee injury.
I should know. I mean, I should know this. Now that you said that, I feel like I definitely should know this, and it's embarrassing.
That was the one that I think would have given it away. And if I would have said his
Chuba
offense,
Hubbard. It's Chuba Hubbard.
Yes, it is Chuba Hubbard. If I would have said his offense, I said they had a tough matchup last week. It was the Eagles. It was a tough matchup. I was trying to be a little vague in some areas, but Chuba Hubbard is basically a top 12 back this year. He got paid the money, so in real life, like props to him, he got his bag. But now, like rest of the season, the concern was like, Jonathan Brooks. We talked about it last week. Usage was ramping up a little bit for Brooks last week. Saw 33% of the backfield carries. It was Hubbard's worst usage since week 2. And Brooks was looking good. Unfortunately, he re-tears the ACL. So now, rest of the season in what are some good matchups. Panthers are favorites this week, 1-point favorites at home against the Cowboys. I mean, this is a great spot for Hubbard, not just this week, but the rest of the season. You might have picked him up on waivers, drafted him in the 14th or 15th round of your drafts. I mean, I think this is probably the single-handed, maybe best overall pickup or player in all of fantasy right now. You could probably name 1 or 2 other guys, but he's up there.
I'm pissed that I didn't get this. But yeah, that you did a good job disguising that one. And you're right that he is in the wake of the Brooks kind of, God, what a bummer, man. It just absolutely sucks.
Yeah, it's so bad.
my two main dynasty teams, one of them I drafted Jonathan Brooks in the first round. So that one is just completely crushed. The other one I actually traded for Chuba Hubbard in the middle of the season. So like what a hedge on this whole Panthers backfield situation. So I don't really know. I feel for Jonathan Brooks though, man. That just absolutely sucks. But it's a good thing that Chuba Hubbard has emerged here. And yeah, I mean, down the stretch, I think you're right. Like Chuba Hubbard very well may be a just elite fantasy running back. Cowboys this week, Cardinals, their pass defense has gotten better, but their run defense is not very good, as Zach Charbonnet showed us last week. Sincere McCormick averaged over 5 yards per carry on the damn Bucks. That's who they get in week 17. So yeah, Hubbard, I like this call as a guy that maybe is going a little under discussed and certainly could end up being a league winner.
Yeah, I mean, since week 1, all but 2 games he's finished as a top 24 running back. As mentioned, 50% of those a top 10 back. In his last 2 games, if we count this week with Jonathan Brooks going down, and the last time Brooks was not in the lineup in week 10, you're getting 31 touches a game. Like, they've just completely shifted this offense to Bryce Young is playing better, sure, like we'll move the ball there, but we're still leaning on, if we can, 20 times a game Chuba Hubbard.
All right, I'm heartbroken. I'm devastated that I missed this one, especially a player who I like a lot. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break. We come back, run through my 5 stats that people need to know heading into week 15 right after this. All right, we're back. Let's run through my 5 stats here, storylines heading into week 15. First of all, I want to talk about Brian Robinson Jr. coming off of the bye week. Robinson has 75% of the team carries inside the 5-yard line since week 11. That is despite playing just 17% of the snaps in week 12 against the Dallas Cowboys because he got a little banged up. He played on 51.3% of the snaps in week 13 without Austin Eckler in the mix. Austin is on IR, wishing him the best. I don't know if we'll see him the rest of the regular season. Chris Rodriguez only got run in the second half. So if you look at like the backfield splits and stuff like that, you're going to see some Chris Rodriguez, but that was a game before the bye that they were controlling over the Tennessee Titans. So Rodriguez only really mixed in the second half. I feel like Robinson still got a pretty big bump without Eckler in there. He also led the backfield with 11 routes. I would argue that this is a great spot for Brian Robinson, potential smash spot as a 7.5-point road favorite over what's left of the New Orleans Saints and their 30th ranked defense in rushing success rate allowed. It's tough, Sal. You've talked about a lot of guys this week that I kind of want to rank in my top 15. There's a lot of good running back options this week, but man, Brian Robinson certainly fits into the group that I think is a top 15 play on the board this week.
Yep, definitely top 20 on my early rankings at this point. I love and echo everything you just said about Brian Robinson. This morning, I took his over 69.5 rushing yards. They are 7-point favorites, like you said, this week. There's been 6 completed games for Brian Robinson as a favorite this year. In those games, he's averaging well over 70 rushing yards. He's averaging 15 fantasy points per game, and that's with Austin Eckler in basically every single one of those games. The last time we saw Brian Robinson before the bye, yeah, he basically got pulled in the fourth quarter. This was a guy coming back from ankle and knee injuries, and they were up big. He had a 40-yard touchdown on his first carry. They pulled him. So in 3 quarters of play, he gets you there for over 100 yards. A much needed, I would say, for Brian Robinson. Definitely bye week in week 14. He's coming out fresh. Best matchup maybe you can find. Definitely a top 5 one against the Saints at this point and what's left of their run defense. So everything feels good about Robinson this week. Tougher matchups the rest of the way after that, but if there's going to be no Eckler and we get even just 2 catches a game unlocked in the passing department for Robinson, I think that goes a long way.
Eagles in week 16, but I mean, Falcons in week 17 also looks like a pretty decent matchup for Brian Robinson if there's no Austin Eckler in that one. I dig it. I think Robinson is definitely, like I said, top 15 play this week. Maybe going to be a little bit tougher against the Eagles, but man, he's just smashing from a goal line perspective right now. That role is pretty sweet for him. On the season, he has 8 rushing touchdowns. He is one of just 12 running backs with 8 rushing touchdowns on the season. Okay, let's move to a player that, when I pull up the consensus rankings, is in the top 15 backs, but I'm a little bit nervous about this week. Like, we're talking about all of these good running backs. Jonathan Taylor coming off the bye, I think, is worth considering. And like I said, I'm a little bit concerned. On the one hand, Taylor has played 90% of the team snaps since week 11. That is more than any other running back in the league. I think that might be surprising considering he's averaging just 8.9 fantasy points per game in this stretch. Only Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, and Kyron Williams have a lower target share in this span among the top 35 scoring fantasy running backs. Taylor is 3.0 7% of the team targets. That's a big reason why he is not popping in the fantasy points column, despite the fact that he's playing a ton of snaps. Also, he's 30th among running backs in goal line carry share in this same stretch. I mean, Anthony Richardson being back, it's been intriguing, interesting for the offense, but it is also taken a huge toll on Jonathan Taylor's goal line equity. Like his rushing efficiency's solid. It's historically better with Richardson under center. The problem is he just doesn't get the touchdowns because Richardson is such an ace at the goal line. This week, he gets a matchup with the Broncos. They're number 1 ranked defense in EPA per play allowed on the season, and they're first in rushing success rate allowed since week 8. So we were talking about all these really interesting running backs, Sal. You know, Tyron Tracy, I don't think is quite in this top 15 mix who we mentioned earlier, but certainly Charbonnet is. I think Rachaad White might be if there's no Bucky Irving. We just talked about Brian Robinson Jr. Taylor's a guy that, like I said, I pull up the consensus rankings. He's definitely kind of regarded in this area, but the lack of goal line work, the lack of targets, even if he's obviously really good runner who's on the field a ton, if this matchup with the Broncos does make you a little bit nervous this week.
Yeah, I mean, no team's on by it. My early rankings has Jonathan Taylor as my RB20, so that's probably going to go up based on a couple other things. But, I mean, you have guys like Tony Pollard against the Bengals. You have Zach Charbonnet, as we mentioned. You get both the Lions running backs. Like, you just start pushing these guys down a little bit, and quickly you're outside of the top 12 to top 15. We'll see once we get some more news on some injuries where he ends up for me later in the week. But yeah, I've had these concerns at different points this season with Jonathan Taylor when Richardson has been under center. I mean, we saw it right away in week 1. He had 48 total yards, no touchdowns on 16 touches, wasn't involved as a pass catcher. Then he ripped off a bunch of games of 100-plus yards. He had these explosive runs, but then he suffered an injury. And since then, when Richardson has been under center, you're getting very little passing game usage. And when it is, it's just kind of like this last-ditch effort because Richardson can't evade somebody who's coming his way trying to scramble. And as you mentioned, the big thing is just the touchdowns not being there. Now, all the touches are there. You're getting just like 20-plus touches a game since Richardson took back over 3 games ago for the Colts. So that's good. There's no competition, and that's what we would expect out of Jonathan Taylor. The bye week, maybe if he was still dealing with a little bit of residual effects from his ankle, that should help a little bit as well. Overall, I'm not super concerned rest of season for Taylor, but I would say, like, if you're not getting the touchdowns or targets, those are the cheat codes at the running back position in fantasy, especially in half PPR and PPR formats. That does make you drop down my rankings. Maybe the one thing that helps is if Josh Downs is able to return this week. Like, there's just been no respect to the Colts passing attack these last few weeks. Josh Downs hasn't been out there either. They're not respecting Anthony Richardson, who, I mean, when he's completing 50 to 60% of his passes on good weeks, you can see why. If you're loading the box a little bit more for Taylor, that's going to hurt with efficiency as well. Hopefully Downs gets out there, can open some things up as well.
That's a good call out. I think Downs, but early reports are that he's uncertain for this week. So we'll see if he's able to get out there. I do think especially where he's going to line up in the slot off the line of scrimmage, move it around as the flanker into outside receiver sets as well, I think will be a pretty big it's a good matchup against this Broncos defense that obviously has really good perimeter coverage when Riley Moss is out there and Patrick Surtain are both out there. So Downs would be in a pretty good spot if he's able to play in this game, would definitely open up the offense. And yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? Like you mentioned, I mentioned Derrick Henry, some like similar peripheral metrics to Jonathan Taylor, also playing with a mobile quarterback. The two differences is, one, Derrick Henry's gotten some goal line work. He leads running backs in rushing touchdowns right now. The second thing is just Derrick Henry's like an explosive freak show, and Jonathan Taylor's a good back, but 4.3 yards per carry for Taylor to 5.86 for Derrick Henry. His explosive rushing yards are obviously among the league best right now. It's just him and Saquon Barkley over, not even just over 600, over 500 rushing yards from explosive runs. So like it's a totally different beast. It's a thin margin for error if you're going to play with a mobile quarterback who's more of a goal line threat than Lamar Jackson anyways, is Anthony Richardson. And again, it's just not like Taylor's not on the good side of that margin for error right now. I like your early ranking of him as a running back 20. I probably could share the same sentiment just depending on some of these other options. Okay, I'll move to my third storyline here, which is the Dolphins' offense over the last 3 weeks is first in dropback success rate, fifth in EPA per dropback, but they're 29th in rushing success rate and 32nd in rushing EPA. This tweet from Sam Sherman I thought was pretty good. Devon, surely his yards per carry won't regress by 2,000% Achan. Get the hint here. His yards per carry in 2023, 7.8. So far in 2024, 3.9. He has 50 more carries and 200 fewer yards in 2024 versus 2023. So Achane, obviously great fantasy back. He's mostly scammed his way there due to receptions, and it's just been crazy to watch the Dolphins' run game just completely fall apart the last month or so. But I do think that that's led itself because the drop back game has been so good. Tua has been running this offense, I would say maybe even better than expectations the last month or so. I think Jalen Waddle maybe is a guy we should talk about as a potential trust tree option this week, Sal. He leads the team in this stretch of games with 296 yards with a 10.3 air yards per target. That's the highest on the team. The targets on the team go Tyreek Hill 29, Jonnu Smith 26, Jalen Waddle 25, and Devon Achane at 20. So a lot of guys were asking Tua to support here. I don't know if anybody can go crazy with the targets this spread out, but how are we feeling about Jalen Waddle, this Dolphins passing game? Because that has clearly been the engine of the offense right now.
Yeah, don't look now. Jalen Waddle the past 3 weeks is a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy points per game. So don't look now at the splits here. But Jalen Waddle, I mean, we've kind of said it all year. Young player, paid as one of the best wide receivers in the league. He is one of the best wide receivers in the league. Just earlier this season, it was a lot of Tyreek Hill when he was healthier as well, downfield. A lot of bad quarterback play as well, filling in for Tua. And then a lot of Devon Achane as an extension of the run. And a lot of that has basically stayed the same this past month. It's just kind of clicked. And we've gotten, at least from what I've looked at, is some more Jalen Waddle in breaking routes in that intermediate part. Not so much the deep part of the field, but sometimes, but really the intermediate part of the field. And that seems to really be clicking right now. They kind of spammed that a couple of weeks back. They used it again this past week. But everything else is kind of status quo. Like, yeah, the run game hasn't been good. And almost to some extent, 14 carries for 24 yards for Achane this past week. You go and you look at those, some of them are at the goal line, so again, how much are you going to gain when you're 1 yard away from scoring? But if you look at it, there was a stretch from, I believe, the second quarter, he had a negative 1 yard run. The second he gets the pitch, there's two guys in the backfield. He doesn't see another carry until the fourth quarter, back-to-back negative 3 yard runs, and the moment he's touching the ball, there's two guys in the backfield. So, I mean, a lot of offensive line issues here that you're getting, and it's impacting him. So they're just going to the extension of the run, which is helping. I mean, you have a quick passing game with Tua. He's averaging 5-6 yards per pass attempt or per throw this year, averaged up the target. A lot of that is because of these short, quick passes to now Jonnu Smith and Achane. So you feel good about all these guys moving forward. Yeah, who will it be that gets the 8 to 10 target game? Might be a matchup type thing, just might be of where he's going with his reads to. But even Jonnu, 6 points in regulation, ends with 3 catches, 44 yards, and a touchdown, all because of overtime. Everybody got there this past week for Miami, and the offense is rolling at this point. Tua seems healthy. Hopefully he stays healthy. And I think you feel good about it heading into a matchup against Houston, who their defense on the year has been solid against the pass, but they've also faced Mac Jones, Will Levis, and Cooper Rush their last 3 matchups, and even those guys have put up some 250 to 300 yard performances against them. So I feel really good once again in Houston, not a cold weather situation for Tua.
If we are looking for matchup stuff here, if you just look at when this team faces cover 2 since week 8 when Tua returned, which is the Texans, I believe they play the second most cover 2 in the NFL. So we might be going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but that's okay. Jalen Waddle does lead the team in yards, 25.2% of the team yardage when they face cover 2. In Tyreek Hill is second. Jonnu Smith is actually third there with 13.7%. So that does make some sense to me. 13 targets to Jalen Waddle is the most. 43.7% of the air yard share is actually a significant lead for Jalen Waddle when we're talking about facing cover 2, which is what the Texans are going to play a lot. So if you're looking to start Jalen Waddle, that's at least something to hang your hat on. And it does schematically make sense, right? The way to beat cover 2 is to throw it down the field, down the middle. And you're talking about, Sal, all these like Jalen Waddle in-breakers. We could probably see a couple of those against the Texans this week.
Yeah, I think so. Early rankings have Jalen Waddle getting into my top 30 wide receivers, which outside of last week when there's 6 teams on bye will be the first time that's happened in honestly probably 2 months at this point, but I feel okay about it.
Yeah, I feel okay about that as well. And, he's going to be – do you feel better about Jalen Waddle over a guy like Jaden Reed, DJ Moore? Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think so too.
Okay. What's crazy is Adam Thielen is right next to all these names we're talking about as well. And I would actually have to think between Jalen Waddle and Adam Thielen at this point, which is crazy.
I agree. I have these guys all kind of ranked similarly. Khalil Shakir is there. Jordan Addison's on a hot stretch. And by the way, just we're talking about this. This is what the wide receiver position is. This is what happens. Like there are pockets of the season when these guys face certain matchups. And like the Green Bay receiver room is an extreme example just because the targets are so spread out there and they run the ball so much. But yeah, it feels like every single wide receiver, Sal, there's been a stretch of the season where it's like, what's going on with this guy? Right. I mean, even Jamar Chase, right? Like Jamar Chase is probably the best fantasy Is he the best fantasy asset this year? I think you could argue. But remember, he started the season with 62 yards against the Patriots in a loss, 35 yards in a win against the Kansas City Chiefs. Had a big game, 2 touchdowns week 3 against the Washington Commanders. But, 85 yards against the Panthers. And it really wasn't like week 5 against Baltimore and then kind of then on. It was an eruption fest for Jamar Chase. But again, just a reminder, and I know he's coming off a contract holdout. That's like kind of a cheating example. But this is how the position works, man. There's pockets of the season where guys are really good. Nobody's going to be super consistent outside of the top players. But even like I said, the top player in Jamar Chase, he had a bit of a cold stretch to start too.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you could even remember Malik Neighbors' hot start to the year, and then things change all around, whether it's play calling, the quarterback, injuries to your offensive line. Like the wide receiver position, unlike the running back position to some regards, like running back position, you can create on your own a lot more, in my opinion, when you have to rely on the quarterback, the play caller, the offensive line at the wide receiver position. Especially we're seeing it with CeeDee Lamb. Last night he has a nice game, but in general this year, tough for him to work downfield without Dak Prescott. You completely change the expectations at the beginning of the year. Everything gets thrown off in the NFL, especially when injuries and these situations come into play.
Yeah, meanwhile, the only thing that stops Puka Nacua is when he punches somebody. His body falls apart. So that's the only thing that stops that guy. Okay. 4th storyline here. Falcons pass catchers versus the Raiders. This is another check-in on something we discussed last week where we mentioned the Kirk Cousins splits versus zone coverage. Week 14 check-in on that. He had a pretty strong plus 13% completion rate over expected versus the Vikings zone coverage, but obviously, both of his interceptions came against zone, and pretty classic, like what Kirk is not doing well throwing into zones or over zones right now. The Falcons are going to stick with Cousins. I think that makes a little bit of sense. Maybe it's just not Penix's time for them, and Penix, by the way, like might not be an upgrade for the fantasy pass catchers, because there's just going to be more volatility there. What Cousins is doing is he's losing games to the Falcons and turning the ball over. But at least last week, he pumped the production to the pass catchers. And I think this could be another big week for both Falcons wide receivers. The Raiders are top 10 in man coverage rate, according to Fantasy Points data. They give up the 3rd most points per dropback when they play 2 high, which they do more than they play single high. And they play a bunch of cover 2 as well. When you look at the Falcons wide receivers versus 2 high, Mooney actually leads the team with 2.5 yards per route run. Drake London is second, of course, with 2.32, but he actually leads the team with 25% of the targets, which again, similar to what we just talked about with Jalen Waddle, makes sense. There's two high safeties, cover 2, throw it down the middle in the intermediate area to Drake London. So despite the fact there's all this worry about Kirk Cousins and, okay, are they going to bench him? Is it Penix time? Whatever. I actually think both Falcons wide receivers, we know who Drake London is, but Darnell Mooney coming off a big game. And I think that kind of eased a lot of concerns after pretty disappointing game coming out of the bye, dealing with an injury the week prior against the Chargers.
Yeah, it was a week where, you talked about the zone-heavy nature of the Vikings last week. Maybe should have seen it coming. Ray-Ray McCloud gets spammed on the underneath stuff on his 5-6 average depth of target volume. He leads the team with 11 targets. But yeah, I think it makes sense for flippening to happen this week instead of Mooney ranking 3rd in the pecking order in targets. And even on that, he had a massive game last week. I think we start to see some more target volume for him. Continue to see all year what we've seen for Drake London, just this great usage, first read targets, whether it's on the outside or in the slot, dominate after the catch. Everything's been good for him. I'm not concerned about that. In this matchup, a matchup that we just saw the division rival, the Bucs, last week for the Falcons go up against the Raiders. Baker puts up 295 yards. 3 touchdowns in that matchup. I think we can maybe see, honestly, something similar, a little bit of a breakout game, a get-right game for Kirk Cousins here, who really needs it after this past month. You're going to be in a situation where this should be a neutral game script. I don't see this team leading by 2 to 3 touchdowns, that being the Falcons. So we should probably get another 35-plus pass attempts from Kirk Cousins. Maybe a pick, maybe 2 more picks, but as we've been saying, like that only fuels more passing volume for fantasy receivers.
I said it yesterday. I can already hear, Troy Aikman and Joe Buck talking about this on Monday night. Like, what a game. Kirk Cousins needed this. 250, 2 touchdowns. Drake London caught 8 balls. Darnell Mooney had a big play over the top against this hapless Raiders team. I mean, he really needed this before the season still just kind of falls apart, and then the team goes nowhere. And they trade Cousins in the offseason, and Michael Penix plays next year. But again, I'm not necessarily rooting for Penix to get out there from a pure selfish fantasy perspective. I think from a watchability perspective, I'm curious on the Penix stuff, but I think if you have London, if you have Mooney, you probably want Kirk Cousins to stay under center, even if it's not a pretty watch. Okay, it's time. My secret stat of the week, the fifth and final stat here. All right, Sal, only 2 players have a first read target share, according to fantasy points data, north of 40% the last 4 weeks. One is Puka Nacua, who just went berserk against the Bills last week. The other is my mystery player of the week. This player has caught 86.5% of his catchable targets in this span. That is the most of any player with the first read target share over 35%. He is also the only player averaging over 20 expected fantasy points at his position in this stretch. You may be shocked to know also that he has 4 targets inside the 10-yard line, 1 per game in this stretch, with 3 coming inside the end zone. So Sal Vetri, who is my mystery player heading into week 15?
I'm going to be honest. I think this is the most confident I've been all season. I only have one name in mind. The at his position for 20 points, I think gave it away for me. I think it's a tight end. And just from doing projections the last couple of weeks and going, this guy had 15 targets. This guy had 14 targets, another dozen targets. I'm going to say this is Trey McBride. And you may be shocked to hear this because he can't score a touchdown catching. I'm going to say Trey McBride.
It is Trey McBride.
We're back on the horse.
We're back. You're back. I'm off the horse. You're back on the horse. I wondered if that might end up giving it away. But I was look, the volume has been there for Trey McBride, no question about it. But I was shocked to see that he had this many targets inside the 10-yard line. I mean, watching the games, it does feel like they are trying to get him a touchdown.
Yeah,
100%. Really, really, really bad. And
the last play of the game, they tried to as well.
100%. Yeah, I mean 100%. And it just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I mean, not much more to say about Trey McBride. A 40% target share for a tight end over this stretch is, unheard of, especially when you have the first-round wide receiver Marvin Harrison on a team who's actually starting to see more volume as well, and you're still just becoming the number one priority in the middle of the field for your offense. Yeah, everything is good for Trey McBride fantasy managers. He was the only guy probably that you drafted in those first 5 rounds at the tight end position that is really paying off. Maybe Mark Andrews has come along a little bit for you, too little too late in some regards, but you didn't get there with Sam Laporta. You didn't get there with most likely Travis Kelce during stretches this year, but Trey McBride has surely gotten you there, and he'll be the tight end one next year as well.
There's a lot of reasons why picking Marvin Harrison, at like the round 1 to 2 turn was not going to didn't work out for people and was maybe a bit of a faulty process. And I have Marvin Harrison on a couple teams, so I'm not calling people out here. But the biggest flaw in this was that he might not even be he hasn't been this year, but he was probably not even going to be the best pass catcher on his own team, which is Trey McBride. That's how good Trey McBride is. Shout out to Dalton Del Don, who pointed this out all last year into the summer that Trey McBride's yards per route run as a tight end was just berserk last year, and he's continued to be the most impactful pass catcher at his position this year. Where I think Harrison has been fine for a rookie. He's been fine. He was going to truly have to be generational. He was going to have to do what Puka did, but better to beat his ADP last year. And honestly, it was just going to be tough with Trey McBride. So that is a big lesson learned on that one.
Yeah, McBride, as you would imagine, just entering, third year in the league, second year as a legit starter, you're going to improve. You're going to have off seasons where you're with the starting quarterback, more of the first team offense. You just have a way and a rhythm in your NFL career. And that's what we've seen. One knock on him last year was maybe, yards after the catch really wasn't there. A catch and fall down type of guy. That's completely changed this year. Yards after the catch is definitely there. The yards per route run, that's factoring into that as well. The efficiency is all the way there for McBride, and he's doing it on insane volume, which is the craziest part. 8.5 targets per game, and the guy is still probably the most efficient tight end in the league. Yeah, hard to top that.
Yeah, it's a shame he's going to finish the year with 2 touchdowns, which is nuts. But all right, let's toss to our final break. On the other side, Sal's going to give us a few stash candidates for your playoff run right after this. All right, Sal. It's time. Fantasy playoffs are here. Let's give the people some stash candidates as they head into week 15.
Yeah, I'll just start with a reminder of who we've talked about in previous episodes, and really last week when we discussed Blake Corum, Ray Davis, even Trey Benson in pretty good depth. It's all out there. Those are guys that are basically either efficiency-wise, they fit their offense great, or they're the only guys in Blake Corum's case seeing touches behind the starting running back, who Kyren Williams is getting a lot of volume and has an injury history. So those guys are like priorities for me, maybe the top 3 priorities. But if we want to dig a little bit deeper now, especially after this past week, it's just continued with Chase Brown looking so good. Khalil Herbert is somebody who I think becomes a serious stash now. This Bengals offense is putting up 400 to 500 yards per game at this point. The offense is dialed. The defense continues to play very poorly, and it's just fueling this environment where Joe Burrow is performing like an MVP, throwing 45 times plus per game at this point. And a lot of those are checkdowns to Chase Brown. I don't think Khalil Herbert is the same player as Chase Brown, but he is the only running back in this backfield the last 3 weeks to earn a single snap behind Chase Brown, basically since he became a member of this team. So you look around the league, and a lot of these handcuffs are going to be rostered at this point, whether that's Zach Charbonnet after this week or whoever it might be. The names that you already know, Tajay Spears maybe is still out there behind Tony Pollard, another name maybe to consider. But I think Khalil Herbert in this offense, if something was to happen to Chase Brown, I believe they trust him over Travion Williams to probably see 60 to 70% of the work, and that's enough to stash at this point, especially if you're a Chase Brown fantasy manager in the playoffs.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're right. I mean, in terms of the widely available kind of like running back insurance players, he's got to be one of the guys near the top of the list. Like, he's very much out there. And I think he's a proven player too. He's somebody that isn't like, obviously I'm in on stashing Blake Corum and Trey Benson and these guys, but they are still probably more theories than anything else. We at least know Herbert can carry a big workload and be an effective back in the NFL. Matchup with the Titans this week, Browns and the Broncos. Not exactly like the greatest stretch down here for the Cincinnati Bengals, but still, even in a matchup against the Browns or the Broncos, if there was no Chase Brown or Herbert was starting, he would still be a guy I think that would rank kind of as a fringe starter.
Yeah, and I think you could do this with a lot of running backs. Like, at this point in the season, I definitely want to start prioritizing handcuffing my running backs if I can. Like, let's just go to the Yahoo rankings if you're listening to this, the consensus rankings, sort by running back rankings for this week, and just look at like those top 5 to 10 names and say, okay, who is their backup? Like Saquon Barkley, totally. Kenneth Gainwell behind Saquon Barkley. If something happens to him, obviously the entire Eagles offense would have to change. He is the Eagles offense, but I'm pretty sure Kenneth Gainwell starts seeing probably a dozen touches per game in one of the most efficient offenses in the league, right? Bijan Robinson, we know Tyler Allgeier's already rostered. Derrick Henry, there's some guys behind him, a Justice Hill, or Keaton Mitchell, depending on how deep your league is. That's just a really good exercise to do. I would say Khalil Herbert, Kenneth Gainwell, these are the guys who are still out there and widely available in leagues, and guys that if you're still trying to stash or handcuff or top targets for me.
I love it. All right, you've got a defense for people to stash here. This is what the people really want to hear. Who is the defense that can make a difference in the fantasy postseason run?
Yeah, savvy and very good fantasy managers who didn't have to worry about Week 14, were already in their playoffs, maybe even already clinched a bye. They probably went out and picked up the Colts defense that was on bye last week because they didn't need to roster an extra player on their bench. But if the Colts defense is still available in your league, as of this recording, dropped in a ton of leagues, available in over 70% of Yahoo leagues, you should be picking them up. They're playing better as of late for one, so that's one tell. And then they're going to be facing Denver, Tennessee, and the Giants in the fantasy postseason. Okay, Denver has been playing a lot better. They're coming off of a bye. That's the toughest matchup they're going to find, though, and I don't think it's one that I'm too overly concerned about. It's not the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen, right? Still Bo Nix. Then you get Tennessee and maybe Will Levis at that point. He's banged up. And the Giants and whoever they're trotting out at quarterback in the fantasy championship. Defenses, overall, they'll be overlooked for the fantasy postseason, but if you can get ahead of it and get a defense that can get you 12, 15, maybe 20 points in those matchups against the Titans and Giants, that will tilt your matchups and chances to get to the fantasy postseason just because you were paying attention a week ahead. I'm fine stashing a defense at this point, and you could use the Colts every single week if you want to in the fantasy playoffs now.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I mean, Bo Nix definitely the best quarterback they're going to face, but he's still a guy that will push it down the field on you and give it back to you, like we saw in his last game against the Cleveland Browns. So yeah, I mean, for sure, I love that. Look, you're getting Will Levis and whoever the hell the Giants are running out of quarterback. That is a great defense to start. Widely available defense that you can get there, and obviously the Colts have issues on that side of the ball. Gus Bradley, but their pass rush has been at least okay, and it's all about takeaways so far for the rest of the season and from a fantasy defense perspective. Sal, that's going to do it. You said it all. You've done it all. What can the people check out from you as they try to tweak their rosters and not freak out the rest of the way for the fantasy postseason?
Yeah, we're diving even deeper into matchups each week during the fantasy playoffs. So tomorrow will be a whole column up on Wednesday. By the time you're listening to this, actually, on the running backs to exploit the best matchups on the week. Thursday will be wide receiver matchups to exploit. And then Friday will be the key findings, the piece we've been doing every single Friday that you should read. Check out some key information before setting your lineups in week 15.
Love it. Definitely make sure you're reading, watching, consuming everything that Sal is doing here for us this week and every week through the rest of the fantasy season. That is going to do it for this show today. Tomorrow, the Fantasy Film Room will be back with Nate Tice. We also preview a big Thursday Night Football game, NFC West. It's just going to be a total slugfest here between the 49ers and the Rams. Until then, we are out.